Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Brent Dykes. He is an enterprise analytics leader. He is an author, a best-selling author of effective data storytelling, founder of AnalyticsHero. He helps organizations turn their complex data into strategic decisions through the power of data storytelling. He has over 20 years in analytics, and he specializes in bridging the gap between insight and action, transforming raw analysis into high-impact business decisions. It's my pleasure to invite Brent, and I just wanted to add this little aside as well. Brent was one of the people I really looked up to when I started on LinkedIn, continues to be, and it's a real honor for him to be part of the podcast today. So welcome, Brent. And if you'd like to share any more about your story, please do.
Yeah. Thanks, Christopher. It was great to be here. And briefly, my story, I started in marketing. I don't come from a STEM background. I didn't study mathematics or statistics or economics or anything like that. I had a marketing or business degree. Started in marketing. Then I went back, got my MBA, and then that's when I got into marketing analytics. And so that was my first exposure to working with numbers and things. When I was in college, I actually debated between going into accounting or marketing. And everybody was saying, oh, you should definitely choose accounting if you're good. I got good grades in my accounting classes. But for me, I really liked the psychology side. And so I was drawn into the consumer behavior and marketing side. And so that kind of drew me away from just the pure numbers. But I always had the capability to do numbers and different things. But obviously marketing wasn't seen as really a quantitative field as it is today, which I would say it's transformed. Now marketers have all kinds of data and rich analytics and obviously how they're using those numbers. It can be brought into question, but definitely it became a world in which my skills in numbers could actually benefit me with a marketing analytics related career. So I worked for 12 years at Adobe and working on their analytics side of their Adobe Analytics platform. And then obviously I did 4 years at Domo on the BI side. And so that's where I got really in-depth focus on dashboards and reporting. And that's when I started writing my book on effective data storytelling, which maybe some of you know about. And that really showed me as I was looking at reporting and dashboards, it really kind of clarified to me that data storytelling is something different. It's not just dashboards, not just reporting. It's something special or something different. And so that when I published that book, I then went to work for an agency, Blast Analytics, for a year. And then for the last 5 years, I've been doing training and workshops around data storytelling. And so this month will be my 5-year anniversary. So of my business, which is, made it to 5 years.
Yes, 5 years.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story. And what I found is that data storytelling is something we're both very passionate about. It often gets confused for a lot of other things, and it's this kind of umbrella term. I'd love to get your perspective as an expert on this. What is data storytelling, and why is it so fundamental to good communication or decision-making or success in our companies?
Yeah. And I've done several posts and articles on this. I think the key thing about data storytelling is we're trying to communicate an insight to a group of decision makers to hopefully inspire them to act and make a decision. Insight, that word, coming from a marketing background, especially from a technology marketing background, especially from an analytics world, we use that word very loosely, insights. And as I've interacted with different businesses, I find that they use that word very loosely. And I think that's a mistake. So when I was writing my book, I had some book reviewers who came back to me and said, hey, you mentioned the word insight a lot across your chapters up until now. I don't think they'd finished. They weren't on the final chapter yet, but they gave me feedback and said, you should define what you mean by insight. And so when I heard it from these book reviewers, I was like, oh, that's great feedback. So I went back to the first chapter and I was about to write it. And then I was like, wait a second, I use that word a lot, but have I really given thought or pause to really what an insight is? And at that point, I was like, oh, I don't know if I can define it. And then so I looked at the dictionary definitions, and they didn't really scratch the itch, so to speak. I didn't feel like they really captured the essence of what an insight was. And then somebody introduced me to Gary Klein, who's an author and psychologist. And his definition is basically an insight is an unexpected shift in the way we understand something. And to me, that simple definition really parted the clouds and really made something really crystal clear in my mind, that an insight is where maybe we have an existing viewpoint about something in the business, and then the data come back and actually turns that apple cart over and kind of says, wait a second, what we thought or what we expected to see here, how we think this should work or how it is working is actually not correct. And so then that cascades into a bunch of, okay, well, if we're thinking about this differently now, that means we need to act on it differently in different things. So for me, an insight is a key part of every data story. We're trying to package up the information that we have on this insight, and then hopefully make it actionable where, okay, so if this is true, and this could cost us X amount of dollars, then we need to fix it. And so how are we going to fix it? And there's always, with a data story, there's also, okay, what do we recommend? What are the next steps? How do we act on this? And obviously there's the narrative arc that threads, it's that thread line or that through line that goes through everything and connects everything, ties it together in a neat package. And it's very unique and different from reporting or, what you see in a dashboard.
Yeah. You've raised so many important things and overturned a lot of misconceptions, because I believe in the data industry or tech, there is this belief that insights could even be as simple as turning data into a visual. Oh, there's insight. Or even in the title, just saying sales are going up, and that's an insight. But as you're indicating, it's a shift in the way we believe things that dramatically changes the way that people do work in organizations and the way things get done. And the other misconception you overturned is that there's this tendency for a lot of us analytically minded folks to not want to tell people what to do. We want the data to speak for itself, but you're saying it's vital for us to share our recommendations and next steps. Otherwise, people have to figure it out for themselves.
Right.
Are there any other big misconceptions you see when it comes to data storytelling that you'd like to overturn?
I mean, another big one that I see a lot is that data visualization is data storytelling. And, that's been one I've also been, probably the two biggest ones are the dashboards are data storytelling, and that the data visualization is essentially data storytelling. And I actually flip that and say, well, actually data visualization is a part of data storytelling, but there's, one of the things that often gets overlooked, if the insight part comes, I basically say there's three main pillars to data storytelling: data, narrative, and visuals. So insight would be, definitely in the data side. The narrative and that narrative arc, that's the thing that I think, there's a lot of people out there saying, oh yeah, we'll offer training in data storytelling. And it's really just more data visualization training than anything. And obviously that's important. I think how we communicate with data often needs to rely on visuals. Probably I would say something surprising to some people, but I would say actually of the three core elements, I would say data and narrative are more critical to data stories than visuals even. And not that visuals aren't important. Obviously I still am a big advocate for visualizing your data in effective ways, but what about a podcast? I can have a podcast where I can't display any visualizations, but I'm still telling a story with numbers, with facts and figures in a compelling and meaningful way that could drive action. And I have no visuals. So, I see the visuals pillar as being supportive of the other two pillars. And that might be something that would catch people by surprise, that I'm not anti-visualization. I'm just saying that not every story necessarily needs to have visuals. Again, I point to the podcast example that kind of illustrates that.
I'm of a similar mind. And when I teach presentation skills, I say the slides are not the presentation. You, as the presenter, are the presentation. Your story is the presentation. You should be able to give your story without slides. And slides are the support for you, but not
Right.
necessary for delivery. And
Yep.
since we are on a podcast, I'd love to dive into the data and narratives portion of your 3-pillar framework. For
Yeah.
narrative specifically, because this is often the area that people are least familiar with. Could you break down the data storytelling arc? I love the image that you have in your book. We can't show it here, but if you could break down the components of it and what makes it work, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and I'll kind of introduce how I got to the data storytelling arc and what it was influenced by. So a lot of people are familiar with the expression that stories have a beginning, middle, and end. And I always kind of rubbed me the wrong way because, well, I could point to a report or an email and say, well, it has a beginning, middle, and end, but it's not really just that it has those 3 parts. It's what's happening in those sections or those acts that are really critical. And I think that's what often gets overlooked with that simplistic 3-act structure that actually came from Aristotle when he was looking at Greek tragedies and different things. He kind of articulated that 3-act structure and has been, obviously very well known. And then on the other hand, you have something like the hero's journey. And if you're familiar with the work of Joseph Campbell, who was a mythologist, he studied Greek plays and fables and legends and then basically found that most stories of that nature kind of follow a hero's journey where they leave on an adventure, they go through some initiation process, and then they come back as champions. And he had like 17 different steps. And when I looked at that model, I was like, oh, this is too complex. I mean, great for writing a fantasy novel, but not as effective for how do I tell the board that we can't spend the $2 million this month on X or whatever, there's mapping that would be impossible. So on one hand, I have a model that's too simplistic, another model that's too complex. And so I kept looking, and then I came across Gustav Freytag, who was a German playwright in the 1800s, and he studied Shakespearean plays. He looked at Greek tragedies, and he found that they all had this arc to them, and it ended up being called the Freytag Pyramid. And this is also very well known, where if you think about a story, there's kind of some setting, and then you have an inciting incident where the main character has, they get into their first bit of trouble, and then something happens to them, and then we have the rising action that leads up to the climax of the story. And so then, you go through all these different things that build tension and build on each other until you get to that big moment where you battle the final bad guy. And then you have the resolution and denouement, the end of the story. And so what I found is, hey, I can take that model and map it to data storytelling. So if we take now the context of a data story, you have to establish the setting of what is this data we're looking at? What time period? What are we comparing it to? Setting the context so people, before I give my first observation or major observation, they're already kind of, oh, okay, so this is for the European region. We're looking at online customers, like we're laying down the foundation of what's normal or what's expected, what's the status quo. And then our inciting incident, which I call the hook, is really that first major observation that we had in the data where we say, whoa, why did this metric drop? Or why did this metric spike? And then from there, I call it the hook because we're hooking the audience, right? We're basically, if they care about the subject that we're sharing, that, well, why did that metric go up? Or why did it go down? Why did we see that anomaly happen? Like they're now intrigued to hear more. And so then instead of rising action, I call it rising points, where we basically say, well, we broke down this problem and we found it has 3 main contributing factors, so we're breaking it down, we're analyzing it, we're kind of doing this reveal, building up to, in our case, not a climax, but an aha moment, where I define an aha moment as the insight that I mentioned earlier, plus the so what. So we've got the insight, oh, this is going to hurt our business significantly. And the so what is, well, it's going to cost us $5 million if we don't fix it. Oh my gosh, now we have the aha moment that's going to capture people's attention. And then we have the last part of my act or my 4-act structure is the solution and next steps. So, talking about what are the options, what are the cons and pros of each, maybe there's even further analysis to kind of say, here are the 3 options. We've analyzed this one. Here's the B option. Here's how this one would play out. And then C, and then we have the next steps and kind of how do we move forward. So we're kind of basic. I often refer to the data storytelling arc as we're holding the hands of the audience, guiding them through our analysis that we found. Now, being careful, like I think it's important. Sometimes I see with analysts, they get excited about sharing all of the work they did to kind of find the insight. That's not what I'm talking about. It's not the story of you doing your analysis. It's the story within the analysis, if that makes sense, and bringing that to the executives and helping them to kind of step through a logical, you're connecting the dots in their head so they can come to the same realization as you did that we've got this $5 million problem and now they'll feel the urgency and the need to kind of act on it and do something about it.
I love the way you formulated the arc, how we start with the data, and of course the story comes from that. But when we're trying to find the narrative, we don't use all of the data or analysis. We kind of put a layer on top, and that's the arc itself. It's the hook, and then the rising points, and the insight. You mentioned then recommendations. And then from that, we could say visual support that narrative.
Right.
Something that I wanted to touch on that you mentioned a little earlier is the importance of tension in a story, how that keeps people engaged. Now, the counterpoint that I've heard sometimes is that in business, we must be efficient. We must tell people what the answer is at the beginning, and like an executive summary or something like that. What is your perspective on the proper role of tension and how early we should surface those big points, or should we wait and let the context build to it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say every situation is different. Every audience is different. Even if the audience in the general area is the same, maybe the nature of the data is slightly different. So everything's going to require a slightly different approach. And so, things like tension are a big part of storytelling. Now, if you only have 15 minutes with an executive and you don't want to waste 5 minutes of those, with a big tension moment probably you have to walk through your numbers pretty quick and get your point across quickly. And so the element of tension might come out because you can't draw it out and really, make them think and things. But tension is a great tool. I mean, I kind of view it as like, we have this toolbox for telling our story, and depending on the audience, depending on the room, as so to speak, and what the data is trying to convey, we can reach into that toolbox and do different things. And so things with like executive summary. Now, when I started doing trainings and speaking about data storytelling, and I'd introduce my data narrative, my data storytelling arc, I would have people come up to me afterwards and say, love the concept. It's not going to work with my executive. What do I do? I mean, they're accustomed to getting an executive summary, which basically, if you look at executive summary, it gives away the aha up front, and it's about conclusions first, and that ruins a data story. I mean, the whole thing of that arc is really important to storytelling. It, if I give you, like if I take a movie like, The Empire Strikes Back and say, okay, let's just cut to the chase. Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. Right. Would you have the same experience that somebody who went through that entire movie and then got to that key, climax and discovering that Luke Skywalker is, his father is Darth Vader? And I'm basically saying, if you haven't watched Star Wars and I've just now ruined this for you, I don't care, because you probably didn't prioritize watching that movie and hearing that Darth Vader is Luke. Anyway, so what I recommend, and I actually did a Forbes article on this. I said there's actually a triangle of data communication, And on each of the, if you think of like the project manager, kind of like project management triangle, sometimes called the iron triangle, I think, where you basically have cost, scope, and time. And so you can have any two of those corners, but you're going to be sacrificing the third corner. Well, in a data communication example, I have brevity, depth, and comprehension. And so if we think about a data story, that what is it sacrificing? It's sacrificing brevity to give you depth and comprehension. So your audience is going to really deeply understand what you're communicating. Now, an executive summary is brevity plus comprehension, right? So it's trying to, and what is it sacrificing? It's sacrificing detail. It's sacrificing that depth of information. And sometimes that's fine. You know, in what I argue in the Forbes article, you have a situation where it's simple, basic, day-to-day kind of operational decisions that need to be made. An executive summary is perfect because it's brief and it's going to cover, you know, it's going to help you to understand what you need to do in that moment. But it's not going to be as deep on the content. And so whenever you have a high stakes decision, something that's a more material, deeper, you're going to need to understand it deeply so that you can make the right decision. An executive summary on something like that could actually be misguided. So the other side of that, you know, where you have depth and brevity, which is very hard to do, I have something I call a story teaser, or basically a pitch. You can think of a pitch that way. What are you doing? You're basically giving away a couple of deep cuts. You're taking the hook and the aha, and you're giving it away. But what you're not, it's positioned a little bit differently. You're actually inviting people to pique their interest to hear the rest of the story. And so rather than an executive summary that's brief, we have a quick synopsis or pitch or teaser that then invites people to either say, oh, thank you, that's good enough. No, I don't want to hear more. Or yes, I now want to hear the rest of the story. What do you mean that we have that $5 million problem if we don't tell me more? And then at that point, we've now just in that teaser, we've leveraged that teaser into telling a data story. So I kind of see it, you know, again, if you want to learn more, there's a recent article I did on Forbes, and maybe we could link to it in the notes or whatever. But if you want to learn more about that story teaser role, which I think that's something that we've overlooked, and in many cases we do, but we sometimes don't realize it's not an executive summary. It's actually a story teaser that we need or we're doing without realizing it. But yeah, I think there's different moments, different times, different audience. You know, we have to kind of, again, pull from our toolbox the right tool for the job, and recognizing that sometimes the task is different than the previous task. And so we might need a different tool or a different approach. And and I think that's the key thing, just recognizing when we need to use something different rather than just hammering everything with a dashboard. You know, oh, that's your problem. Okay, let me build a dashboard for that. Or, oh, you're trying to do that. Okay, let me build no.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the way that you formulated this. It's kind of like how for us as data and tech professionals, we choose different charts for different data. And in the same way, for different situations, we have a story teaser or an executive summary or a full-blown data story presentation. And we have to use the context to determine what's most appropriate. You raised something else important I'd like to touch on a little more, which is when we present, like a story teaser, for example, people's curiosity is piqued and they ask questions. I think one of the things that people fear most when it comes to delivering a data story is the questions they get. How do they feel prepared? How do they answer critical questions and pushback? What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I would say if anybody's nervous about questions that could come up in their data story, I would recommend having a robust appendix, right? So there's two approaches that I like to recommend. If you have a situation where you have an audience, like you're going to be presenting a data story, you've got the rough idea of how you're going to lay out the data story. And now the question becomes, what questions could the audience ask you? And I would say if you have a question that everybody's going to answer this, everybody's going to ask this, then I would say you need to build that answer into the flow of your story. Because if it's everybody's going to ask it. Don't let them ask it when you're not ready. Just build it into the story so that even if they ask it early, you can say, well, I'm coming up to that. Hold on. I'll get to that, but build it into your story where you're answering the question that everybody has. So that's one thing. But then the second thing is, if you don't, Brent, I don't know what questions I'm going to have, but I want to be prepared for whatever they ask. And so then I would say, well, then that's where you would want to have a robust appendix, so that, and for two reasons. One, for the confidence that that you have, you can access charts and data or tables or whatever it is to answer any question that comes up. So there's a confidence boost that you will have, that you're not going into this naked. You're not going in unprepared. You're going in very prepared, and ready with ammunition in case they ask questions or whatever. And then even then, if they ask that one question that come on, nobody can be 100% prepared for everything. But if they do ask a question and you have data to kind of go into that, you can say, okay, well, let's go to the appendix slide, and here we go. So what I did here is I broke out this by what you just asked, and you can see it's nothing. So you also look prepared to your audience, and that can also be good for you and your reputation. This being, wow, like Brent was able to answer that question. I had never thought that Gary would ask that, but he did. And Brent was able to answer it on the spot. Wow, that was really impressive. So appendix, the more nervous you are, add more appendix slides. And I do feel like the danger that we have sometimes when we get nervous, we start to prepare all of this work and we leave it in the main deck. And that means that those random one-off questions that you're nervous about answering, the deck flow is going to force you to answer questions that your audience maybe wasn't even going to ask, but you thought they might. And now that could open a can of worms and things. And it derails, maybe you're going now on tangents through your story. And so you start to lose your audience because they're like, I don't know where this guy's going. He's meandering all over the place. So, so in summary, appendix slides are your friends.
Excellent advice. And I think this is a perfect place to wind down our episode today. Clearly, you have so much expertise and knowledge. I'll be linking to the Forbes articles you mentioned as well on this topic of data storytelling. And I want to pull out 3 big insights. I don't know if I should call them insights, but 3 big things that stood out to me in our episode today. One would be your data storytelling article. When we have all this data we've analyzed, the temptation is to walk people through our analysis. But the truth is, we should go through your framework to pull out the big high-level picture. Hook, then rising points, how did we get there? And then going into the insight, the thing that shifts the way that people understand, and then going into the recommendations, next steps, things we should do. The other thing that stood out is the importance of the kind of balance we have to make between brevity, depth, and I believe it was comprehension that you mentioned. Executive summary can do 2 of those things. A presentation can do 2 of those things. We have to find the best tool to fit the situation. And then the last thing you mentioned just before is the importance of an appendix. It helps our confidence. It helps us answer questions on the spot. We can refer to them easily. And it's a great tool in any presenter's toolbox. So thank you so much, Brent. Is there anything you'd like to add to that as a final note for the audience?
No, just, I encourage people to tell those stories, find that time, carve out that time to do some analysis, find those insights and tell those stories. I mean, there's going to be plenty of reports to build. There's going to be plenty of dashboards to build and maintain, but, try and if you can break out a little bit of time to do some data storytelling, I think that's going to really enhance your career and your visibility within your organization to kind of show like, hey, I'm bringing real insights to the business and helping to make them actionable.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brent, for your time. I'll be posting in the show notes your LinkedIn, which I recommend everyone follow, the Forbes articles you brought up, as well as your website, which has your masterclass, more info on your book, which I think everybody should check out as well, and more information about you. So thank you so much, Brent, again for your time and for everyone who has participated today.
Thanks, Christopher.
Yeah. Thank you, Brent.